Oh my God. Oh, God. Oh my God.
The chandeliers were too bright for a room still in mourning. That was the thought that arrived first, before anything else. Before I found my seat, before I scanned the tables for familiar faces, before she appeared at the far end of the hall in ivory and lace and a smile I once believed was made for me. The chandeliers, 3 of them, cascading light across the ceiling in long golden arms, filling every corner of the room with a particular warmth reserved for celebrations. And beneath that warmth, beneath the flowers and the music and the sound of 2 families finding a common language for joy, there was something the light could not reach. A shape in the room that had no body. A chair that should have been occupied. I felt at the moment I walked in the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. Not pain exactly, but the persistent awareness of an absence that has no business being there. Khalid's family had arranged white lilies at the center of every table. Someone had told me later that lilies were Yasmin's favorite. I don't know if that was intentional, a tribute woven into the decor, or whether the coincidence was the kind that only feels significant in retrospect. What I know is that I sat at table 11, near the back, and I looked at that lily for a long time before I looked at anything else. She was standing near the platform when I finally found her across the room. Jane, the bride. She was speaking to one of Khalid's aunts, her head tilted at the precise angle that communicated both attentiveness and grace. Her hands folded in front of her in a way I recognized. She always folded her hands like that when she was performing composure, when she needed the other person to see serenity and not the calculation underneath it. She was radiant. That is not a word I use loosely or without pain. She was genuinely, undeniably radiant, and the sight of her hit me in the chest the way it always had, even now, even knowing what I knew, and that was perhaps the most honest thing about the entire evening, that I could look at her and still feel the wreckage of having loved her. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The object was there, where it had been for the past 3 months. Small. Familiar. I did not take it out. Not yet. I ordered water from a passing server, and I sat with my hand in my lap, and I breathed, and I waited, and I thought about Yasmin. Yasmin Al-Rashidi was 26 years old when she died, and she laughed at things that weren't conventionally funny. Dry observations, small ironies, the particular absurdity of serious people taking themselves too seriously. She had her brother's eyes, that same deep steadiness, but where Khalid's steadiness read as gravitas, Yasmin's read as warmth. She made you feel seen without making a performance of it. She was the kind of person who remembered what you told her 3 conversations ago and brought it back at exactly the right moment, not to impress you, but because she had actually been listening. I met her through Jane. They had been friends since university, or so Jane had always described it. Close enough to finish each other's sentences. Close enough that when I entered Jane's life, Yasmin was simply already there, a fixture present at dinners and weekends away and the ordinary accumulated moments that make up a relationship. I liked her immediately. I trusted that fondness because it felt clean, uncomplicated. It did not occur to me to question the nature of the friendship. People who are very good at performing closeness rely on that, on the assumption that warmth observed is warmth felt. Jane and I were together for 2 years and 4 months. I will not compress that into something smaller than it was for the sake of narrative efficiency. 2 years and 4 months is long enough to believe in something. Long enough to reorganize your future around another person. Long enough that when it ends, the ending does not feel like the end of a chapter. It feels like an amputation. She left me for Khalid 11 months ago, 3 weeks after Yasmin's funeral. The timing did not register immediately as significant. Grief displaces logic. I told myself she was processing loss in a way I couldn't understand. I told myself proximity to Khalid during his mourning had evolved into something. I told myself a great many things that allowed me to feel only abandoned and not suspicious. The suspicion came later, quietly, the way true understanding always comes, not as revelation, but as accumulation. It started with a photograph I found while clearing a shelf where Jane had left some of her things. A printed photograph, which was unusual in itself. Nobody prints photographs anymore unless the photograph is meant to last, meant to be held. It was of Jane and Yasmin, taken at what looked like a garden party, both of them laughing. But the date stamp on the back was from 8 months before Yasmin died. And on the back, in Yasmin's handwriting, were 5 words that I read and set down and picked up again. I know what you are. 5 words. I told myself it was playful. The kind of thing close friends write. I put the photograph in a drawer and did not think about it for 2 weeks. Then I thought about it again. Then I began to remember things I'd set aside without examining. Small things, the kind that only become legible when you have a frame to put them in. The way Jane had reacted when Yasmin was first taken ill. The specific quality of her grief at the funeral, which had felt performed in a way I couldn't articulate at the time. The fact that she had been with Yasmin the afternoon before her collapse. The fact that the death had been ruled natural causes without extensive investigation, because Yasmin had a documented heart condition that provided a convenient explanation. I'm not a detective. I'm not a forensic specialist. What I am is someone who loved a woman for 2 years and 4 months and learned, in the process, how to read the things she did not say. And what I read, across those weeks of quiet accumulation, was not innocence. I did not go to the police. I want to be honest about that. I gathered what I had. The photograph, a voice note Yasmin had sent me 3 days before she died that I had never deleted, a conversation between Jane and me in which she had said something about Yasmin that I had not understood at the time, but understood now with a cold, specific clarity, and I held it. I held it for 3 months while I decided what kind of man I intended to be. Whether the man who loved her could survive being the man who told the truth about her. The invitation arrived by text. Khalid had my number from a dinner the 4 of us had shared once, early in his relationship with Jane, when the world still had its original shape. He was not cruel enough to uninvite me, or perhaps simply careless enough to forget I was on the list. I stared at the message for a long time. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Then I put my phone down and looked at the drawer where I kept the photograph and the voice note and everything else, and I made a decision not with my mind, but with something underneath it, something that had been waiting for a frame and had finally found one. I confirmed attendance. I went to a tailor. I put on a dark suit on the morning of the wedding and stood in front of my mirror and looked at myself for a long time, the way you look at something you are about to change forever. The speeches began at 9. Khalid's best man went first. A university friend named Omar who told a story about a road trip through Morocco that involved a wrong turn, a borrowed donkey, and a hotel room that turned out not to be a hotel. The room laughed generously. Khalid laughed too, though the laugh arrived half a beat late, the way his laughs often did now, genuine, but passing through something on the way out. Grief does that. It doesn't stop you from laughing. It just puts a toll booth on the road between feeling and expression. Jane sat beside him at the head table, her hand resting on the cloth near his without quite touching it. Watching, always watching the room, reading it, adjusting. She had always been gifted at that, at knowing what a room needed and positioning herself accordingly. Khalid's mother sat at the front table and watched her son with an expression I could not fully decipher from table 11. Pride, certainly, but something else underneath it. Mothers who have lost children carry a specific quality of attention at celebrations, a sharper awareness of joy's fragility, a tendency to watch happiness the way you watch a flame in a wind. There is a small framed photograph of Yasmin on a side table near the entrance to the hall. I had seen it when I came in and had not been able to look at it for more than a second. Someone had placed a single white lily beside the frame. The gesture was quiet and devastating, the kind of tribute that speaks precisely because it does not try to speak loudly. Khalid's father stood for the 3rd speech. He was a tall man with Khalid's build and a voice that filled the room without effort, the kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself to be heard. He spoke in Arabic first, for perhaps 3 minutes, and though my Arabic is limited, I caught enough. Family, honor, gratitude, the particular word for blessing that sounds like a door opening. Then he switched to English, and what he said in English was this, that he had lost a daughter this year, and that losing Yasmin had broken something in the family that he was not certain could ever be fully repaired. But that tonight, watching his son stand beside a woman who had been there through the worst of their grief, who had sat with them and wept with them and helped carry the weight of a loss that had no clean edges. Tonight, he felt something he had not expected to feel again so soon. He felt, he said, like the family was being asked to continue, and that Yasmin, wherever she was, would want them to continue. He raised his glass. The room raised theirs. I did not raise mine. Something had happened in my chest during that speech, a door closing on a last remaining hesitation. I had come tonight with the intention to act, but intention and action have a gap between them, and in that gap I had been living for 3 months, and what Khaled's father had just done without knowing it was close it. He had thanked Jane. He had placed her inside his grief as a source of comfort. He had held her up in front of his family as proof that goodness had come out of loss. And she had sat there and received it, her eyes soft and downcast in a perfect simulation of humility, and I thought of Yasmin's handwriting on the back of that photograph. I know what you are, and I thought of the voice note I'd listened to 40, perhaps 50 times in 3 months, Yasmin's voice saying she needed to talk to me about something, that she had found out something about Jane that she didn't know what to do with, that she was scared. I reached into my jacket. The object was a bracelet. Silver, thin, with a small engraved charm. A crescent moon, which Yasmin had worn every day for as long as I had known her. I had found it in a coat Jane had left at my flat, in an inside pocket, zipped shut. When I found it, I had stood in my hallway for a very long time, not moving. Yasmin had been buried wearing it, according to her family. That was what her mother had said at the funeral, that they had buried her with it because she never took it off, except she had been buried without it, because it was here, in a coat pocket, zipped shut, and I had been carrying it ever since. I closed my fingers around it. Then I stood up. The room did not notice immediately. I was at the back, and the applause from the father's speech was only just settling, and there was the sound of glasses being set down and chairs shifting and the ordinary ambient noise of 200 people existing in a room together. But I did not sit back down, and stillness at a table draws attention eventually, and within 30 seconds the tables nearest me had begun to register the man standing at table 11 who was not making his way to the bathroom. I spoke loudly enough to carry without shouting. In a room of 200, that requires a specific pitch, not the pitch of argument, but the pitch of announcement. The room quieted faster than I expected, perhaps because the quality of my voice communicated that this was not a toast. I said Khaled, just his name, not the room, not Jane, him. He turned from the head table and looked at me with the polite confusion of a man trying to place a face in an unexpected context. I watched the recognition arrive. He knew who I was. We had met. He associated me with Jane's previous life. And then the confusion deepened because this was his wedding and I was standing uninvited at the back. I said, I need to say something about Yasmin. The room went very still. Yasmin's name had that effect on this family, in this room, on this night. It was a name that carried weight. Khaled's expression shifted from confused to something I can only describe as braced. The expression of a man who grieves and knows that grief can ambush you from any angle at any time. I said, she was trying to tell someone something before she died. She tried to tell me. I didn't listen in time. I have spent 11 months trying to decide whether to tell you what I know. I'm telling you now because your father just thanked the woman who killed her. The silence that followed was absolute. Not quiet, absolute. The kind of silence that has weight and temperature. I heard someone inhale sharply to my left. I heard a chair move at the front table. I heard from the head table a small sound that I identified after a moment as Jane beginning to speak and stopping. Khaled had gone very still. His face had not collapsed. It had done the opposite, had become very controlled and very focused, the face of a man applying every resource he has to remaining functional in a moment that is trying to unmake him. His eyes did not leave mine. I walked forward, not to the head table. I stopped at the nearest empty table to my path, perhaps 8 feet from where I had been standing. I opened my fingers and placed the bracelet on the white linen. The sound it made was almost nothing, a small metallic click against the table. But the woman at the nearest front table, Khaled's aunt, I believed, made a sound when she saw it. Not a word, a sound, the kind that comes before words, before language has organized itself around a reaction. She stood up. She said something in Arabic, rapid and low, and reached for the arm of the woman beside her. Khalid looked at the bracelet for a long time without moving. Then he looked at Jane. She had composed herself by then. She was standing, which she must have done while I was walking, and her expression was the one I knew best. The expression of someone managing a situation, measuring the room, calculating the response, most likely to reclaim the ground being lost. She said my name. She said it with a specific inflection. The inflection of a woman addressing an unstable ex-boyfriend at her wedding, placing me in a category, giving the room a frame through which to see me. She said that whatever I was going through, this was not the place. She said that grief affected people differently. She said, her voice steady, that what I was claiming was not only false but cruel, and that she forgave me for it because she understood I was hurting. It was masterful. I will give her that. In almost any other context, in front of almost any other audience, it would have worked. But Khalid's aunt was still holding the bracelet. She had picked it up at some point. I had not seen her cross to the table, but she was holding it now, and she was speaking to Khalid's mother, and Khalid's mother had her hands pressed flat against the table in front of her, and was looking at the bracelet with an expression that made the room around her irrelevant. She was somewhere else entirely. She was in a place where a daughter was buried, and the bracelet was supposed to be there, and it was not. And now here it was, and the arithmetic of that was doing something to her face that I could not watch directly. Khalid said Jane's name. Just her name. Quiet. The same pitch I had used. Not an accusation, not question. An address. A door being knocked on. She turned to him, and something happened in that turn that I had not anticipated. Not because I hadn't imagined the exposure, but because I had imagined it as something I would witness from a distance. And instead I was close enough to see her face in the moment Khalid said her name, and looked at her the way he was looking at her. And what I saw in her face was not guilt, not yet, not the full confession of it. It was the recognition that the room had shifted and that she was on the wrong side of the shift. And underneath that recognition, barely visible, was something that looked almost like relief. As if she had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for the weight to be taken from her. Her voice, when she spoke again, was different, not controlled. The composure was still there in the structure of her words, but the temperature had changed. The room heard it. I could tell from the way people leaned almost imperceptibly forward. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said the bracelet must have come off at the hospital. Khalid looked at her for a very long time. Then he said, she was cremated. The room broke. Not loudly. The breaking of a room under the weight of something like this is not always loud. It was chairs and voices and the specific sound of people standing simultaneously, and Khalid's mother making a sound I will carry for the rest of my life, and the coordinator appearing from somewhere and speaking into a radio, and Jane's voice rising finally, losing its composure, and somewhere in it Yasmin's name being said by multiple mouths at once like a wave. I did not stay for it. I had taken 3 steps toward the exit when I heard Khalid say my name. Not to stop me, I think, but simply because I was the only person in the room he could see clearly in that moment. I turned once. He was standing at the head table, perfectly still amid the eruption, and he looked at me with an expression I cannot translate. It was not gratitude. It was not accusation. It was the expression of a man who has been handed something devastating and knows, already, that the devastation is a form of truth he needed and did not have, and who does not yet know what to do with either the truth or the needing of it. I nodded once. Then I turned and walked to the door. The car park was dark and ordinary. Petrol and distant traffic and the faint sound of a city continuing its business without any awareness of what had just happened in a hall 200 feet behind me. I sat on a low wall, and I did not cry. I had thought I might cry, had prepared myself for the possibility, but what I felt instead was not grief in any active form. It was the specific exhaustion of a thing completed, the kind of emptiness that isn't absence but arrival. I thought about Yasmin, not the version of her I had been carrying for 11 months, the version that existed in voice notes and photographs, and a bracelet that had been where it was not supposed to be. I thought about the actual Yasmin, the one who laughed at dry observations, the one who remembered what you said 3 conversations ago, The one who had looked at Jane and seen something the rest of us were not looking hard enough to find, and had written 5 words on the back of a photograph, and had called me because she needed to tell someone and had not had enough time. I took out my phone. I opened the voice note. I did not play it. I had played enough. I just held it in my hand for a moment, her name on the screen, the timestamp showing a Wednesday afternoon in what was now another life. Then I put my phone away and looked up at the sky, which was dark and cloud-covered and offered nothing in the way of comfort or symbol, which felt right. The sky does not perform for grief. It is simply there, and it continues, and that is a kind of honesty. Somewhere in the city tonight, I knew there was a small cafe that Yasmin had liked, a place with mismatched chairs and plants growing in the window, and a specific tea she had ordered every time without looking at the menu. I had not been there since she died. I thought that maybe tomorrow I would go, that I would sit in one of those mismatched chairs and order the tea and drink it slowly, not for any reason that could be explained cleanly, just because she had liked it there, just because somewhere had to remember that she had. The taxi arrived 8 minutes later. I got in. The driver asked me if I'd had a good evening. I looked out the window at the lights of the city passing in long amber streaks, and I said nothing, and he did not ask again.